Let's talk about the next principle. We've talked about two so far, reciprocity and scarcity. And that is authority. The tendency to defer to legitimate experts. And that makes all kinds of sense because, after all, a legitimate expert typically has gotten to his or her position by virtue of greater wisdom or knowledge or experience in an arena. It makes so much sense, in fact, that people use this principle to guide their behavior when it makes no sense at all. There was a study done at the University of Texas. They had a man stand on a crowded street corner and cross the street against the light, against the traffic, against the law, to see how many people would follow along behind him. Half of the time he was dressed in an open-neck shirt, jeans, and athletic shoes. The other half of the time he was dressed in a suit, pressed shirt, tie, shine shoes. 350% more people followed him into traffic when he was wearing a suit. Now think about that, because I don't think the people on that street corner were thinking about it. Even if this man were the authority that his clothing suggested, some high-powered business executive, he was no more an authority on crossing the street than the rest of them. But in the context of authority, we defer in a mindless kind of way frequently. We follow because the experts say so. Our lives have become so overloaded, stimulus-saturated, decision-involved, that we need the shortcuts associated with legitimate authority. When I go to the supermarket and I want to buy a good tube of toothpaste, I don't want to first have to go to my university library and research the chemical constituents of a good dentifrice. I want to turn the box over and see that the American Council on Dental Health has certified this. The experts say it's fine. I can put it in my cart and I'm on my way to my next decision in my decision-overloaded day. We need these principles. They steer us correctly most of the time. That's why we're vulnerable to them. Okay. Well, what then constitutes the most effective form of authority communicator? Right? Turns out we can look to the literature in social science for an answer. It's the credible authority, the individual who has two components simultaneously. One is knowledge or expertise. We've already talked about that. That needs to be established. People want to follow experts. If you are an expert, by the way, on a topic and you want to influence people in a meeting to move in your direction, one mistake that we frequently make is to fail to inform them of the bases for our opinions in terms of our credentials, background, experience. It's a delicate thing to do because you can't become a boastful braggart, but some method has to be available to deliver that message to the people who don't know us. They don't have a crystal ball. They can't tell. I would suggest something, by the way, that is used much more frequently in other cultures than our own. When people are meeting for the first time on a set of issues, a business meeting, for example, it's very frequently the case that they will send a letter of introduction first to precede the meeting, to describe their background. And it turns out to be entirely appropriate to put your history and credentials and background relevant to the issues in such a letter. It's no more, it stops being appropriate as soon as you walk through the door. There's a moment, I'm writing a book right now called Moments of Power. The thesis being that there are particular moments in the course of social interaction when the same appeal will be much more successful than if you wait a minute or if you ask too soon. That's one of those moments. right before you walk in terms of the authority principle. Okay, so knowledge is one. The other, though, is trustworthiness. This is the perception on the part of your audience that this expert information you are providing accurately depicts reality, that you are not trying to line your own pockets to serve your own interests. Instead, that you are trying to depict the true state of affairs for them in an unbiased, impartial way. If you have both of those, knowledge and trustworthiness, social science has never uncovered a communicator who would be able to defeat your message. Never. You're the single most effective communicator that we have ever identified. All right, we've talked about knowledge. How do you establish your trustworthiness? And to the credit of all of these sales programs that I infiltrated, they frequently said, well, you work with people. And over a long period of time, if you are a straight shooter, if you are honest, if you are above board, what evolves is a perception of you and your traits as trustworthy. And I think that's fine, and I think it's commendable. But what if you don't have a long period of time? What if you are meeting someone for the first time again? They don't know you. They don't have a history, a track record of your honesty. What can you do? Turns out that there's a strategy that's been developed by the advertising industry to handle precisely that state of affairs. Because they are constantly in the position of having to introduce new products and services and individuals, candidates, and so on, to markets that don't know anything about them yet. So here's what they have found, that immediately before you mention the strongest argument in your case, the most compelling feature of your position, you mention a drawback to your case. You mention a weakness in your case. And what that does is to establish you as both knowledgeable about the pros and the cons. You know the entire range of features. And it establishes your honesty because you are willing to talk about the cons as well as the pros. Let me give you some example from advertising campaigns you'll recognize. Avis, we're number 2, but we try harder. Do you know that Avis has not spent a single penny in that campaign for the last 15 years, but their major competitor, Hertz, is still counter-programming against it 15 years later? Here's another one. L'Oreal. We're expensive, but worth it. The Peace Corps. It's the toughest job you'll ever love. Listerine. It's the taste you hate 3 times a day. I mean, you get the idea. In each of these, they start out. Now, I'm not saying the first thing that you do when you walk into a room is to say, oh, let me tell you what's wrong with me and my ideas. But before, there's another moment of power. And it exists immediately before you deliver your strongest argument. You need to establish your credibility first, and then your strongest argument occurs in the context of a credible communicator. Much more effective that way. Okay.